YNW Melly's trial is beginning on March 7th. With the trial being 2.5 weeks away, prosecutors have now dropped 66 pages worth of DNA evidence against YNW Melly to the judge. As usual, I was able to pull the files from the court case. Here's what they said. The state of Florida have filed in 66 pages worth of new evidence against Melly. In these new pages of evidence, they're claiming that after running ballistics reports, all signs of who did the act towards Juvy and Sakchaser in the vehicle points to where YNW Melly was sitting inside of the car. Here's the photo where everyone was sitting inside of the vehicle. YNW Bortland, being the driver of the vehicle, had YNW Melly sitting directly behind him. That leaves YNW Juvy and YNW Sakchaser both sitting on the opposite side of the vehicle. Now, using what's called the stick method, they use plastic sticks to match the trajectory of the firearm that was used. The trajectory from YNW Melly's seat showed a perfect match to where YNW Sakchaser and YNW Juvy were affected once they were brought to the hospital for examination on what happened. Also, in the new evidence reports, it claims that once the act was done inside of the vehicle, law enforcement were able to use YNW Melly's cell phone as a GPS tracking device. On the day it all happened, YNW Melly had 2 cell phones on him, one being a personal cell phone and one being a business cell phone, all linked to the T-Mobile network in the United States. Law enforcement were able to see YNW Melly walking around in a circle motion at the time that law enforcement believes the act was done. The theory is that after the act was done inside of the vehicle, YNW Melly then stepped out of the car and roughed it up in a 360-degree motion using a firearm to make it appear as if a drive-by happened. That would then be their excuse at the hospital. Now, this theory seems true, as the shells from the firearm that they found outside in the parking lot actually ends up matching the shells that were found under the floor mats inside of the vehicle right beside YNW Melly's seat. Law enforcement also states, and I quote, "These particular cell phones, which were both iPhone 10s, were on the T-Mobile network." And so T-Mobile has a very interesting feature where it will tell you the environment the cell phone is in. So from these cell phone records, I can tell you the exact moment demons got out of the car and staged the drive-by location. The 2 cell phones in YNW Melly's pocket, from my understanding, is a massive deal in this case. One being his personal phone and the other being his business phone. On YNW Melly's personal phone, law enforcement found case-breaking evidence. As found in the case files, it states, and I quote, "Then also, we have a video of Mr. Demons admitting to doing an act towards 2 individuals in the head." This video was on Mr. Demon's cell phone, which was brought to my office by Jameson Francis, and that is how we had that, and that is all of the evidence that Your Honor has. Jameson Francis in this court file is otherwise known as 100K Management, being YNW Melly's music manager. Now, this is a majority of the evidence being used against YNW Melly on March 7th. All of this evidence is crucial against Melly when you hear the timeline of what happened the day Sakchaser and Juvy sadly passed. Now, it starts on October 26 in 2018. At roughly 3:30 a.m., YNW Melly, Juvy, Sakchaser, and Bortland were all at a recording studio getting work done until their session was over. After their session was done, video surveillance shows the 4 men getting inside of their Jeep and they start heading home. Video surveillance footage shows YNW Melly sitting in the seat directly behind YNW Bortland, which is very important due to the evidence I shared earlier. As I mentioned, the driver of the vehicle on this night was Cortland Henry, otherwise known as YNW Bortland. Bortland ended up driving on a back road home. Allegedly, this was to skip early morning traffic. While driving on the back road home with no witnesses in sight, allegedly a vehicle then stops Bortland's car. Bortland then stops on the brakes and sits directly in the middle of the road, not moving. That's when the opposing vehicle then rolls out their windows, and even somebody allegedly coming out of the other car and starts using firearms towards Bortland's vehicle. It was described as a war zone going on in the middle of the street. Melly and all of his boys ducking for cover inside of their Jeep. Sadly, Sakchaser and Juvy were affected in this situation and sadly passed. Meanwhile, YNW Melly and YNW Bortland were able to get out of this without a scratch. They ended up just sitting there in a total surprise while the opposing vehicle ended up driving off. 40 minutes then passed and YNW Bortland then drove Sakchaser and Juvy to the nearest hospital for medical attention. Meanwhile, YNW Melly sprinted home down the road. And that is YNW Melly and Bortland's story on what happened during this situation. The law enforcement side of the story obviously doesn't sound anything like Melly's, but it definitely lines up with the evidence they have found against him. Law enforcement doesn't obviously know what happened inside of the car. Their theory is that the car was pulled over to the side of the road on their way home. A distraction was then made to catch Juvy and Sakchaser off guard, while YNW Melly from the back seat did the act towards them. After YNW Melly did it, law enforcement believes that's when he hopped out of the vehicle and in a 360-degree motion around the vehicle used the firearm that he used against them on the car. They believe this as YNW Melly didn't pick up the shells that come out of a firearm when used and left them on the road. These are the same shells that they were able to find inside of the vehicle that they were in, right beside YNW Melly's seat. While he was outside of the vehicle, making it look as if it went through a drive-by, law enforcement were able to watch him on the GPS tracking device on his cell phone the entire time. This is when they then noticed that Bortland started driving the vehicle to the nearest hospital. Meanwhile, YNW Melly was sprinting down the road, running to his house. Now this would explain as to why it took 40 minutes to get Juvy and Sakchaser medical attention, and it wasn't until February 13th where YNW Melly was brought into jail. He was brought into jail for the act that led to Juvy and Sakchaser's passing, and YNW Bortland was also arrested for 2 counts of accessory and helping Melly cover it up. It's very important to know that on March 7th, when the trial does begin, prosecutors are not looking for YNW Melly to be sentenced to life in prison for this crime. They are actually looking for the penalty. They want YNW Melly, as well as the families of Sakchaser and Juvy, they all want YNW Melly to face very severe consequences for what he has done. Now this trial, to me personally, especially after getting the 66 pages of new evidence, is most likely going to be delayed once again. I see this court date probably getting delayed for another 1 to 2 months due to Melly and his team needing time to find out some sort of defense against all of this new evidence. But with all of the evidence that is found, starting to really seem as if YNW Melly will be found guilty of Sakchaser and Juvy's passing. Now I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, leave a like and don't forget to subscribe. I'm out. Peace.